can access the slides in the comments section, and we can post them again at the end. Let us know if you're looking. So, welcome to our session on copyright licensed and open resources. We're going to talk about incorporating different kinds of resources into your teaching, into the classroom, in person, and with regards to the online classroom. You can ask us any questions as we go along in the comments, in the chat, and we'll try to answer them as we go along or throughout the presentation, depending on when we're talking about different topics. We'll let you know if we're covering it at a later time. I'm Chelsea Lalonde. I'm the Social Science, Humanities, and Education Librarian. So I'm your liaison librarian. I also answer copyright questions for the university. And I'm presenting along with Kate Gibbings. And Kate is our Engineering and Applied Sciences librarian. And she has a lot of knowledge about open educational resources and Creative Commons licensing and reusing images. So just always a good partner in crime. And we're going to talk about copyright, licensed, and open resources and reusing them in the classroom. So anybody coming in late, in the chat, you can add in comments or questions as we're going along, and we'll try to answer them as we're going or address them in different sections of our presentation. And Kate's also posted the Google Slides link in the chat. So our agenda for today, we're going to talk about using resources in online teaching, where and how we're using them, thinking about background, thinking about the Copyright Act and how the Copyright Act applies to different resources that we reuse, the spectrum of copyright and different types of ways that you can copyright resources. Then we'll look at kind of using different types of resources. So that's where we're going to look at how you can reuse books, articles, images, videos, music, those different kinds of mediums that you might have questions about. Then we'll look at common questions or maybe some difficult questions and cover those at the end. So using resources for online teaching, and I'll pass it over to Kate.
Thank you, Chelsea. I will, oh, of course I'm at the end. That was not good planning. Going all the way back. That there's a faster way to get to the beginning, but I don't know what it is right now. There we go. Okay. So we wanted to start off with framing things a little bit, looking at two distinctions: where you're using teaching materials and how you are using them. So we're going to share in the chat. We have 3 poll questions for you throughout our session. So even though they're all on the same Google form, we would love it if you could just answer the one question at a time. So got the form here.
I've got it in the...
You got it already? Perfect.
Yeah, it's in there.
So if you could answer the first question, if you want to, where do you want to share your teaching materials? So we have a number of options there, or you can type in something else if we haven't covered all the options. We just want to get a sense of where people are going to be using their teaching materials.
And the link to the poll is in the chat now.
So it'll be, looks a little bit like this, slightly different on your version, but I'll give you a moment to answer that question. And we can watch some of those responses come in. You should be able to see this as well after you submit.
Yeah, we can see it.
So not certainly expected that we'll get a lot of responses that people will be sharing in Canvas because, of course. Yeah, I was interested to see course pack. We do see one person referencing that. The virtual meeting platforms getting a high response and providing students with a link. And then a little bit less for the public websites, the social media, the other more public internet usage, but still important for us to cover, and we will. So thank you very much. If those are still coming in, that's fine. We'll still be able to see those, but that gives us a good sense of where people are most concerned about using their teaching materials. So the first distinction we wanted to make, where you are using content in the online classroom versus outside the classroom. And because of the situation for September, where we're looking at online teaching and hybrid teaching, we are mostly referencing the online classroom, but the rules are pretty much the same, maybe just a little differences here and there. But for the most part, online classroom, traditional classroom, it's the same rules for the Copyright Act. Outside the classroom, we mean the public internet, websites, social media, research publications, public presentations, and so on. And the other distinction we wanted to make was how you are using content. So starting off on the left with linking, very simple generally when you're linking. It's almost always fine. Just be careful that you're not linking to something that's posted illegally. So we don't even need to worry too much about the Copyright Act generally when we're thinking about linking. In the middle, copying. So we did want to say that when we say copy, although I think of photocopying and it's called the Copyright Act, but in the digital world, copying can mean so many things. It could mean posting to Canvas, posting to the internet, scanning something, even saving a digital copy to your own computer, or emailing a digital copy of something to your students. So when we say copy, we mean all of those things. And then moving along to a bit more of a deeper use, if you were looking to adapt something, make changes to it, add your own content, and then reshare an adapted version. This is where open educational resources come in, where it's not necessarily your only option, but it's a lot easier to use open educational resources when you want to adapt. And now we'll go back to Chelsea.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Okay, so we're going to cover copyright in this section. And we have another question for you about your confidence about copyright guidelines. So how confident do you feel about following copyright guidelines in your teaching materials? And this is the second question in that poll document. So the poll question is in the chat now, so you can link to it, same link as the last one as well. If you've already answered it, that's all right as well. So generally, a lot of people are kind of falling in the middle about their confidence about copyright. So kind of understanding and some things probably that need to be clarified. And we'll talk about copyright a bit, and we'll talk about it in respect to different types of resources as well. So we're still seeing responses falling a lot in the middle. And that's to be expected as well. Okay, good to know. So basically, the Canadian Copyright Act. And the Canadian Copyright Act gives rights holders the sole right to produce, reproduce, perform, or publish a work. And these rights are immediate, time limited, and transferable. So what this means is as soon as a work is created, it's covered by copyright. Time limited means that after a certain amount of time, about 50 years after the copyright owner's death, work goes into the public domain. With regard to a work being transferable, what we mean is copyright can be transferred. So the copyright owner can assign their copyright in different ways. And a note is that the creator is usually the copyright owner, but this can differ depending on the situation or circumstances. So some quick facts about the Copyright Act that we should all know about. There are some important exceptions to the Act that allow people to use copyright works for educational and other purposes. So these would be different educational exceptions or fair dealing. So we talk about fair dealing a lot with regard to the Copyright Act and fair dealing guidelines that allow us to use or reuse resources for educational purposes in the educational environment. So copyright holders can license their work or grant specific permissions while still retaining copyright. Important to know. And copyright works generally enter the public domain 50 years after the creator's death, and then they become part of the public domain. When we talk about fair dealing guidelines give us the opportunity as educators to share a short excerpt of a copyright work to students in the classroom or in a class. We have to make sure that the work is cited, that we're reusing, and we have to make sure that the use is fair. Um, More details about the fair dealing guidelines can be found on the copyright guide. There's a section devoted to fair dealing and determining if your use is fair. You can do a fair dealing assessment. There's some steps in there to kind of give you some information about that, or you can ask us as well. You can ask me directly. I answer most of the copyright questions that come to the email, and that email address will be for copyright will be at the end as well. So with fair dealing, when we talk about a short excerpt, that generally means 10% of a work. It can also mean a single chapter of a book, one article from a journal issue, an audiovisual work, or an image from a work. Okay, so now we're going to cover the different spectrum of copyright.
Okay, thanks, Chelsea. So now to apply a few of those concepts to some more concrete examples. We're looking at a spectrum of copyright from most restrictive on the left to least restrictive on the right. So all rights reserved, by that we just mean it's under copyright and the copyright holder hasn't given any special permissions for you to use it. In the middle we have licenses, so whether they are paid for or whether they're an open license. So we've got the symbol there for Creative Commons, which we've been talking about, I think, at Ontario Tech a lot more in the last few years. We don't go into a deep explanation in this session of OERs and Creative Commons, but we do reference them several times. So this would be something where someone has shared their work with a Creative Commons license, so it's free for you to use, but you still need to follow the basic terms of that license. And then on the right end, we have the public domain, those things that are no longer under copyright for different reasons. So you have freedom to do almost anything you like with them. So we'll take a closer look at those three. All rights reserved, a good example of this would be a print book that's under copyright. And another example would be an image that appears in a news article. So I'm going to show you this example from CBC. Maybe you would like to use this image in your slides, but it is under copyright, as would be most images on the internet. So it doesn't mean you can't use it, but you do have to rely on the educational exceptions and fair dealing in the Copyright Act to be able to use it. So we'll get more into that. And there's always an option to contact a copyright holder for permission or licensing. Then looking at licenses, examples of ones that are paid for. So an article in a library database would be covered by a license. In our database's A to Z list, we have little license summaries giving you some sense of how you can use what's in there. So for example, for Sage Research Methods, could you put an article in a course pack? Yes, you could. And another example would be your personal Netflix subscription. So you also have, I guess, signed a license in that case. Unfortunately, it says that it's only for your personal use. So this is why you wouldn't be able to show a Netflix movie in the traditional classroom, or I guess, or in the online classroom, because of that. Now, as Chelsea reminded me, Netflix does have some documentaries that are okay for educational use, where they've specified that. If you ever had questions about, personal streaming subscriptions, feel free to contact Chelsea.
And
Um,
I put the link to that Netflix exception for there are some Netflix documentaries that allow educational use. There's a link in the chat now.
Thank you. So you're just following the terms of the license. And it's similar for open licenses. So I have two examples here, an open textbook and an open image, both shared with a Creative Commons license. So in the first case, if I wanted to use all or part of this textbook, reuse it in some way, CC BY and C, I need to give attribution to that person who created it and use it non-commercially. And for the image, I just need to give an attribution. So still following the terms of the license. Finally, the public domain, two examples. When I think about public domain, I usually think about something where the copyright has expired because it's older. So it's been however many years since the author's death. But also, people can just release things into the public domain. So Unsplash is a very popular free stock photography website, which you may have used. And for any photographer who contributes to this, they have to agree to put their images in the public domain. So that means you have a lot of freedom with what you can do with those images. And you don't actually have to give an attribution, although it's often recommended that you do. So if you ever needed to create something like a diagram, or there's a situation where it's really hard to give a bunch of credits, public domain content would be a great option for that. And back to Chelsea.
Can't hear Chelsea.
Thank you. I see the question from Wesley about Netflix. And in the next couple of slides, we're going to be talking about using different types of resources. So video will be covered there, and we'll answer any questions that pop up in that for videos in that section, just to kind of keep everything together. Okay, so using different types of resources. This is where we're going to talk about reusing books, articles, videos, images, and music in the classroom. And we'll talk about, we'll answer questions as we go along as well, which I'm sure many of you will have. Okay, so our final kind of poll question number 3, what kind of content do you want to use in your online teaching? Wait, or what kind of content, technical difficulties. What kind of content do you want to use in your online teaching? So here we're talking about what kind of resources you want to use in the classroom. So the links again in the chat. So many of you have already filled in this section, which is great. A lot of articles being shared in the classroom, a lot of images, a lot of videos, some books and ebooks, um, and some music as well. A little bit less with data and podcasts, but some podcasts and artwork being shared as well. Okay, that's great. So when we're talking about books in the classroom, we're talking about in the physical classroom, but the virtual classroom as well. With the fair dealing exception, we can share 10% of a book or a single chapter in the classroom. Another option when we're reusing books or book chapters is to link to an ebook that's owned by the library. And in that case, you can share a link to the entire ebook if you want to suggest a reading for more than one chapter, or link chapters in the learning management system. Another option for reusing books is to use open educational resource textbooks, and then you can reuse chapters or an entire book. And you want to follow the license for those as well. And you can also get permission to reuse a chapter or license a book or book chapters. So those are options for reusing books or book chapters in the classroom. And remembering that whenever we are posting or reusing any resources to cite the work being used. When we're talking about sharing outside the classroom, the best practice would be probably to share books or chapters from open educational resources just because of their licensing. So that would be the best practice for that. So with regards to articles in the classroom, online or in person, we would be looking at fair dealing as an option for sharing articles. And you can share a single article from a journal issue in the classroom. So in an issue of a journal, you can share a single article. That doesn't mean you can only share one article from a journal. You could share multiple articles. You just want to make sure that those articles are published in different issues. That's the fair dealing exception. Now, if the library has a subscription to a journal and it's in our library collection, you could share multiple articles by linking directly to those articles in the library collection. So you could share multiple articles in the same issue if you share from the library's licensed articles. You could also choose to share open access articles in the classroom. Or if there was an article that we didn't have access to or that didn't fall under these terms, you could always get permission or license a work. So you could inquire about doing that. Outside the classroom, probably the best practice would be to use open access articles and link to those just to make sure that everybody has access to them. And of course, when we're reusing any work, we want to remember to cite the work being used and acknowledge the source. So images, probably where we'll get a couple more questions as well, and make sure, feel free to add them to the chat, which we're watching as we go. With regards to images, when we're reusing images in the classroom, online or in person, we can use fair dealing to share images from a copyright work in the classroom. We want to make sure that the work, that the use is fair and we're following those guidelines. Um, we can use Creative Commons licensed images and provide attribution as required by the Creative Commons image. And those are generally very clear. The attribution, the way they want it to be cited is very clear on a work as well. We can use images that are in the public domain and that are out of copyright. That's a very easy use. Or you can get permission to reuse an image or license an image. Usually getting permission to reuse an image is a little more straightforward than licensing for like something like a book or an article. So tends to be a bit more permissive from the copyright holder, but each copyright holder would have their own thing. Outside the classroom, probably a best practice is to use Creative Commons licensed images because you can give the attribution, the terms and conditions allow them to be shared to an audience, and those specifications are in the license as well. Using public domain images is a good practice outside the classroom as well. Or again, there is the option to get permission from the copyright holder or license a work outside the classroom. Say you're posting something on a website or creating a module that's going to be open to the community outside of Ontario Tech.
Chelsea, we have a question in the chat from Tess Pierce. If I use the same articles or images every time, do I have to get permission with every new use?
That's a good question. I mean, if you're using it from semester to semester in the same document, that should be fine because you've asked permission for the use the one time. What are your thoughts on that, Kate? Any
Oh,
other?
well, I mean, a lot of the options, actually, on our website, so Carla has also noted that we have, oh, and Wesley, I noted your question, and I thought maybe we'll wait for the video, but we can also answer it since we're answering questions right now. Let's do that next after this images one. So Carla's pointed out that we have a page on the library website where we suggest places to get Creative Commons images and so on. So that's in I think our next slide. We have those links. So for something like that, you don't have to ask permission at all because you're just following the license. So you can keep using it, anywhere. As Chelsea was saying, if you've maybe gotten a special permission, let's say to reproduce an image, maybe in an article you're publishing, or even just to post on a website that you're doing with your students, it would really just depend on what you agreed to with that copyright holder. And I think those scenarios are a lot more uncommon, where people have gone to, it must be a very important image if you've gone to all the trouble to license it. But most of the things that you're probably using, you're probably not reaching out to the copyright holder to get permission. So you just keep using it in the same way over and over again.
One thing to think of is if you do get permission or license a resource, keep a copy of the document or that conversation that you have with the copyright owner, because that's the proof or evidence that you have acquired permission. So that's a document that you do want to keep track of and keep a copy of for your records.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
should we do?
Google has a tab that you can search for reusable or public images. Always a good practice to double check as well when you're on the page, because it is kind of automatically generated to an extent. And Wesley, your question.
So Wesley put in the chat a question about student use of Netflix.
Student use of Netflix.
No, I just wanted to know, now that we'll be online, students often use Netflix or any sort of Crave and YouTube presentations when they're doing their work.
Mm-hmm.
What is our responsibility when they use that? Because we are online now and they will be streaming a lot of stuff for presentations.
When they're streaming things for presentations, then it would be kind of like a fair use scenario where they can show a certain percentage of a work. It is a bit of a gray area there because it is
Yeah.
a personal use scenario. Copyright is a responsibility that everybody has, so students have that responsibility as well, to adhere to copyright or license terms and conditions. So yeah, it kind of depends on each scenario and the amount that's being shared.
Yeah, but we don't have control over how much a student will want to play
Hmm.
in a presentation. And so what rules do we give students in our course outline that frees us from any legal liability around copyright if they violate it?
Well, I mean, as a general rule, you would say that they couldn't share an entire video. You'd probably be looking at something like fair dealing and a short excerpt or 10%. Though, because it is a licensed resource, it's a gray area as well. The best use is still to use open videos found online that are posted by the legal copyright owner. But legally obtained videos also apply for the educational exception. So there are different things to think about, different balances and ways that the use could be applied in the classroom or even the online classroom.
Okay, thank you.
We have some links to images in the slide now. We'll have the resources at the end as well. And if you open up the slide link that's at the beginning of the chat, which we'll post the slide link again at the end, you can access these links. When we're looking at images, we want to look at ownership, copyright, and terms of use. These kinds of sections of the websites that images are posted on can give us an idea of the reuse and ways images can be reused from different websites. So you can do a Creative Commons search. Wikipedia or Wikimedia Commons have a lot of images. There's Unsplash, Pixabay, Pexels, Noun Project, Icons 8 as some just resources, just to name a few. So this is an example of the Canadian Space Agency website, and they have an image gallery on their site, and there are several image galleries. At the end of the image galleries, or at the bottom, there's a link to copyright /permission to reproduce. And if we click on this link, you get the page that is shown on the left, or on the right, sorry. And it gives us a lot of information about how to reuse images that are found on their site. So they don't want their images to be adapted, and there's different conditions to the reuse. They state that they want people to acknowledge the copyright and cite it as copyright Canadian Space Agency. Users may not use the images in a defamatory way to bring disrepute to the government. The permission to reuse the image isn't transferable, so you can't reauthorize the reuse of the image from your resource. So if somebody else wants to reuse the image you post, say in a slide, they have to go back to the original source and follow these terms and conditions. They can't be used for commercial gains and or political purposes. But if you wanted to obtain own copyright licensing or commercial use, you'd have to contact their intellectual property and technology transfer department. So they're very clear about the guidelines and who to contact. And often you'll see that that's the case, and sometimes it isn't. But these are what you're kind of looking for to determine the reuse. So videos in the classroom. So in this section, we're talking about only videos being reused in the classroom. We're talking about the physical classroom in some cases and the online classroom as well. So streaming videos are a resource that you can use in the classroom. They fall under the educational exception, so it's okay to show a video to university members on university premises. The learning management system counts as university premises because it is only accessible to those students enrolled in your course. Um, the use has to be not for profit, so you're showing the video not for profit, and it's not an infringing copy, meaning the copy of the streaming video was legally obtained. So ways to obtain a streaming video, purchasing a copy of a video, having a library licensed video shown in the classroom. So we have streaming video collections that you could link to, embed in your class, or show them to a physical classroom in person. Streaming video services are not okay to show in the classroom because they're for personal use and the terms and conditions apply. So those are things to be aware of. The caveat to that is every once in a while there will be some videos that can be shown. For example, with Netflix produced documentaries, many of them fall under their educational exception. So those are kind of case by case things. And if you ever have any questions about reusing a specific video in the classroom, contacting me as your liaison librarian or contacting me to ask a copyright question about something is always a great idea. Um, any question, no question is really too small with regard to that. Um, Reusing DVDs. DVDs fall under the educational exception with regards to being used in person only. I'll get a little bit more into that. When we're using DVDs, you can reuse a personal copy of a DVD and show it in the classroom, or a library copy of a DVD, being if you get a DVD from your public library or from the university library. And the reason we cannot show the DVD in the online classroom is because we can't break digital locks. So the Copyright Act is very clear about digital locks, and breaking a digital locks would be a violation of copyright. And most DVDs, if you tried to convert it, you would be breaking a digital lock. So that's something to keep in mind. When we say using DVDs is for in-person only, what I mean is, say for example, you wanted to put a DVD onto your laptop if you had like an external DVD drive, and stream it synchronously into the online classroom. What we'd have there are issues with technology, where the audio and the video wouldn't sync. We also have to think about issues with students streaming the video. Everybody's internet access is different. It just wouldn't be synchronized properly. The other issue is that if we then, say, recorded the video that we were playing synchronously in the online classroom, we would be breaking a digital lock to record that video, in that we are overlaying a different technology to kind of bypass that digital lock. So that's kind of why we'll specify that DVDs are to be used in person in the classroom only. Other videos that you can show in the classroom, online or in person, online videos. So we're talking about linking or embedding to videos posted by the legal copyright owner using sources such as YouTube, Vimeo, TED Talks, those kinds of sources. And of course, if all else fails and we don't have a streaming video in our library collection that you want to use, you don't have access to a legally obtained one online, or you're limited to a DVD that you just can't stream in the classroom, you can always contact us to see if we can acquire a license to the video through the library so that you can incorporate it into your teaching. And if you have any questions about videos, now is a good time to go through them as well.
Okay, Tess, here's the question again.
Yeah, I was wondering about if a video is produced in the United States, like a friend did a panel on racism in the United States. Is there any um, difference in the way we can use it because it's from a different country?
So different countries have different copyright. Sometimes it depends on how they licensed it, how it was released. So if it's released on something like YouTube where reuse is allowed and posted by the copyright owner, that should be fine. Occasionally, we'll have videos that are produced in another country that are available in streaming video that might be licensed in the United States, but might not have licensing in Canada yet. Sometimes that happens, and it's just we're unable to get a license to a specific video. Um, Questions like that, especially with regards to a very specific video and the different license or terms or how it's released, usually good to answer on a case by case basis because we really kind of have to have a look at the video, see how it's released, and kind of assess it that way. It might be a pretty straightforward answer, but
So
have to
if I
see the
just send you
video.
the link and you just look at it, and that's
Yeah,
all I need? Okay,
yeah,
I'll do that.
yeah.
Thanks.
That would be the best example, and that's kind of an example of how different resources are can be very different, and sometimes a case by case basis is how we might determine if reuse is possible.
So Chelsea, we have another question from Hannah Scott, which I think also our next slide is going to help with this as well.
Yes.
If I make films and post them on my personal YouTube channel, is that a violation of licenses? I have given permission to myself for that.
Okay, so yes, that'll be something in the next question or the next slide. So we talked about videos in the classroom, and on this slide, we're going to talk about videos outside the classroom. So if you're posting a video outside the classroom on a website, social media, an open educational resource like an open textbook, or to YouTube, you want to follow the terms of use. So you're posting something from YouTube, following the terms of use for that source, or following the terms of use for the video that you're embedding online and making sure it's available to the public. Generally, if an online video is giving you an embed code and you can embed it somewhere else, they're granting you permission to reuse it in that way. Now, with regard to Hannah's question, you would be looking at something like the Copyright Act mashup provision. So, user generated content. So, you can use short clips of videos or music that are covered under copyright that are legally obtained, of course, to remix them into another video that you might be posting in the classroom or outside the classroom. Now, to qualify for this provision of the Copyright Act, you have to make sure that the use is non-commercial, so it's not for commercial gains, that it's non-infringing, meaning all the different resources that you're using or incorporating into your video are legally obtained. You have to make sure that you're citing the original sources, either throughout the video or often at the end of the video, acknowledging the sources that you've used. And you also have to make sure that the sources that you're using and how you're reusing them doesn't have an adverse effect on the original work. So different things to consider with regards to that. So you do have to follow the different licenses of the resources that you're incorporating into your video. As a best practice, I would probably recommend not using music that's licensed in a mashup, just because when you're posting something, especially with regards to licensed music on something like YouTube, they do kind of, there's an automatic review of the music, and they'll probably take it down automatically. So just to avoid any complications, I'd probably recommend just not using music that's licensed. And when we're reusing different resources in a mashup to create another video, we also want to look at the amount that we're reusing, making sure it's falling within fair dealing.
And again, that's sort of a gray area. And if you're ever unsure about the amount, Chelsea could help you do a little bit of an analysis of whether it's a fair amount or not. And does that answer your question, Hannah?
Sort of, yeah. And I mean, you can always follow up with us afterwards as well, and ask any questions. Of course, like when it comes to videos that we're creating, sometimes a case by case basis is, and an analysis of the case is what's going to determine how things can be reused as well. So just kind of an overview of our library streaming video collections. We have a subscription to Curio, which gives us access to a lot of CBC documentaries and series that you can link through and often embed through our library collection. We have a subscription to the National Film Board, and some of the videos on there as well have kind of questions and discussion questions that can go along with them. And we also have a subscription to Canopy where you'll see some more feature film kind of documentaries that you can incorporate into your teaching. And of course, if there's a streaming video that we don't have that you're interested in using, you can always contact us to see if we're able to look into licensing and different costs for that. Okay, Hannah has a question about this resource. Does it rotate often? You'd have to clarify. Oh, I understand what you mean, I think. With regards to our streaming videos, generally they are there, but streaming videos that are included within the collections are subject to change. So there is that possibility that could happen. Do they change often? They don't generally change all the time, but it is a possibility. If something changed on you, you could let us know and we could contact the distributor and see if we could get it put back in, especially if you're using it in the classroom. Okay. So with regards to music, since some of you do reuse music in the classroom as well, reusing it in the online or in-person classroom, we can look at the same educational exception. So the educational exception of the Copyright Act makes it okay to play music, again, to university members on university premises. So the learning management system does qualify as being on university premises since it's limited to students that are in the classroom currently enrolled. The use has to be not for profit, and the music being reused has to be legally obtained. So those are things to consider. Again, citing the work and where, acknowledging where the work is coming from. If you're using music outside the classroom, so incorporating it into a video or another resource that you're posting and sharing outside the classroom, it's best to use public domain music, so music that's within the public domain, or openly licensed music. So that's kind of like Creative Commons, but for music. And there are some different sources on the slide that you can use for open licensed music as well.
Okay, so we have a question from Rachel. How long ahead would we need to check if the film is still there on the streaming site so you could get the license to fix it before the class? Like 1 week, 2 weeks?
I would say like a best practice is that you incorporate it into your syllabus, but then maybe a week or two before it's shown, checking it just to double check that it's available, ensuring it's available, and then contacting me if there's an issue with the link. Sometimes links do break, even if they're the permanent links that should be used. But just contacting me if you have any trouble, and a week should give us a good amount of time to rectify it and help you with that. Great question.
I think too, if you were thinking of adding, a video into your course. And you could also check with Chelsea, because I think some of those video databases would be a lot more reliable than others. Like I'm thinking, say for CBC or NFB, we'd have to look into that more deeply, but I don't think those disappear very often because it's kind of just everything. Maybe Canopy would be an example of one that, you might have more confidence checking with Chelsea on a given specific database. How often do these videos sometimes go away?
Yeah, I agree with Kate. CBC's Curio is probably a little bit more stable in regards because it is their licensed video. I have had an example of National Film Board video being taken down recently, and mostly it wasn't a it was a National Film Board video, but what happened in that case was that the license with the originating license holder had expired and distribution wasn't available in Canada through any platform anymore. So it had to be taken down. So it wasn't an arbitrary decision to take it down. And in that case, so it's generally not just the case that they feel like turning on and off switches. There's usually some background to it when we look into it. But a good practice to check just the week before, making sure your link works and letting me know if you have any trouble so we can try to troubleshoot that.
And question from Hannah. If I want to use a song to illustrate a point, is it just better to send them to the official link so it is not embedded?
Linking is always preferable to posting or embedding in a lot of cases, just because linking is almost always permissible. If the code allows you, if there's a code like in something like YouTube, an embed code that allows you to embed it, that should be fine as well. But linking's always good, always citing the source and always making sure that it's legally posted and legally obtained.
Great.
Okay. So common and complicated questions. So I'll turn it over to Kate now.
There we go. So this is our last section where we just have 4 more specific examples, and then we will move into our wrap up. So a very common question is about reusing publishers' slides in the learning management system. The publishers who, with a textbook, have included slides, or this could apply to other materials that go along with a textbook. So they are covered by copyright, and you would need to look at the terms and conditions for those slides or for whatever sort of package of materials you have access to. Many of them do say that you can use the slides as long as you've adopted the accompanying textbook. So that's a little bit restrictive, but that's something to keep an eye on. And then in terms of just putting works in your own slides, I think we've really covered this. So some of this is repetition of what we've been saying, but looking at any license, looking at any terms of use you can find, we wanted to quickly make a point that images, sometimes you could have an image in a larger work, like a book or an article, and it might have a different copyright than the rest of the work. So a good example of this would be if you'd written a published article, maybe you obtained permission to use a certain image. Somebody else who wants to now use that image in your article, they will have to go and get a similar permission to what you got. And always citing the work being used. Again, with videos, with images and music, we've covered this, so we're repeating ourselves again, but just to reinforce the point. There are a lot of situations where you want to create a YouTube video, or you may want your students to create a YouTube video, or that might be an option for them for an assignment. If you want to go the easiest route, using those Creative Commons images is going to be very straightforward. Using Creative Commons or public domain music should be pretty straightforward. If for some reason they need to go beyond that, you can take what we've already said in this presentation. You can reach out to Chelsea if you'd like a little more guidance on that. And memes, this is a bit of a legal gray area, so had to consult, and we do get this question, so had to consult some different sources here. Usually, memes often do contain copyrighted content. This one, for example, I believe is a clip from a commercial. So I'm quoting one Canadian intellectual property lawyer who says that If you are using a meme for educational purposes, you should be fine under fair dealing, or for parody or satire, you should also be protected. If you were using it for commercial purposes, it would be more complicated. But fortunately, we're talking about teaching. Hopefully, you don't even need to think about using it commercially. There are other factors. Is your use fair? The meme shouldn't disparage the original work. You can ask Chelsea if you have a question about a specific one, but in general, this should be fine under fair dealing. And finally, screen captures. So I use these all the time.
Oh, Tess had a question about a meme.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about putting an assignment in the for the students to construct their own memes based on conversations that we've had in class. And there's a couple of meme generators that are free that they can use. Is that okay?
Yeah, I would follow the same rules exactly that are on this slide. And it helps too if you're having them share those memes in Canvas or just in such a way that only the students in the class are going to see those memes, that's going to maybe make you feel just even a little more protected. Right. But you know what, if they were posting them somewhere else, either way, again, because it's a legal gray area, it's sort of, the analyses are saying it should be fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a free meme generator. And then they have the memes, they can make things. Okay, so I think they'll only be sharing them in the LMS system, but who knows what they do with their stuff after.
Yeah, so maybe, don't turn it into a t-shirt business, and, don't, maybe if it was like a Disney clip, don't use it to disparage Disney or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
So screen captures in the online classroom, pretty safe. It's such a small amount of a whole usually. If I'm using 1 or 2 screen captures from a website, not 30 or the entire website I've screen captured. You may want to use them outside the classroom. So we did have a question from a group of faculty who were creating an open ebook using a lot of different screen captures. And just to get some outside advice, we spoke to Lillian Hogendorn at eCampus Ontario, because of course she works with open textbooks all the time. And she felt that this is okay under fair dealing. Again, the screen capture should be a small amount. You're not screen capturing tons and tons of images from it. Some other guidelines from the Copyright Act, I believe. There should be no commercial alternatives where you can't purchase images of this thing. Your use should not impact the copyright holder's ability to sell their product. And there are going to be some companies that will have specific terms of use for screen captures. Google and Microsoft are an example of that. So, if you have specific concerns, feel free to ask Chelsea. But as a general rule of thumb, these are fine to use in and out of the classroom within reason and following some requirements. And back to Chelsea.
Okay, so we have the copyright email. You can email directly at copyright@ontariotechu.ca for any copyright questions, or you can always contact me directly. I'm your liaison librarian. My email's there as well. If you send an email to either of these addresses, I'm likely to answer the copyright email as well. And I can tell now I have a typo in copyright because, typed it in quickly. So it's actually spelled correctly in the email address. Some resources that we use throughout this presentation that you may want to consult. The Library Copyright Guide has a lot of information about fair dealing, the fair dealing kind of assessment and guidelines, and other parts of the Copyright Act. We have an open image and media guide that gives you links to a bunch of different resources for open images and media sources, as well as a list of open educational resource collections that you may want to consult. Some additional resources, eCampus Ontario Open Library has a lot of open educational resources, and the Open Educational Resources Ontario Tech Learning Innovation Guide. Hannah's asking if you accidentally violate copyright. Try not to. That would be my best answer to that, or just, going forward, try to adhere as best you can. And if you have questions about something, always ask us. We can answer them and look into things for you. Asking is always a great idea, and just kind of, doing your best going forward. Different image sources that we've used throughout this presentation. We have links to these at the end here, and you can find the links as well if you look at the slide links. And for feedback, we do have a feedback form. If you have any questions about content that we presented during the workshop, or other questions as well, you can contact our copyright email, and my email address is here as well.
So I've just added the feedback form to the chat, and we do appreciate it if you're able to fill that out for us so we can continue to make improvements as we do sessions like this.
So that's kind of our wrap up for the session. Do let us know if you have any more questions in the chat, and we can answer them as well. Kate?
Yeah, I think that's what I was going to say too.
Okay.
I think we have this room a little longer, so Chelsea and I won't be leaving too quickly if anybody feels like they want to stay behind and ask or talk about anything. But thank you
So
for
my sense is, if I can just
Yes.
ask, my sense is that almost the majority of what we will be using things for will be on our LMS in the classroom, and that there are plenty of places we can find things that are sort of open use that we don't have to worry about getting licenses for. Is that right?
Yes, when you're reusing resources in the learning management system, it falls under fair dealing and educational exceptions a little bit more often, given that your use is definitely educational and it's limited to students in the classroom. We still have to think about the licenses, terms of use, and copyright for all the resources that we're reusing, but generally there are more exceptions for educational use and within the learning management system as well. Paris is asking about a version of this workshop for students. We've not done one in the past, but it's not outside the realm of possibility. So that would be possible if you were looking for something like that. Probably a bit of a shortened or condensed version, focusing more on different types of materials and reuse would probably be what you're looking at, I'm guessing.
When Kirsty and Mariel send us the link for this workshop that's been recorded, I will also send out the slide deck.
Thank you.
Hannah, you'd like something about this. When you assign projects to